The Whale Museum here in Friday Harbour is a key figure in the conservation of the critically endangered southern resident killer whales. More than just an information hub, they also educate on all marine mammal species in the area. From Orcas to fin whales, from humpback whales and grey whales to gulls and harbour porpoises, you can find every cetacean species of the Salish Sea. The Whale Museum is a treasure trove of information. They have skeletons of various cetaceans, including this one of an orca known as L7, a southern resident. Observing these bones and even their teeth or baleen is a great way to learn how a whale works. The empty spaces are where vital organs are held, such as the melon. This museum also has a fantastic board showing all of the individuals of the southern residents. Personally, I think this is my favorite thing in the exhibits. That and the skeleton of L7, because there's a lot to learn from that. Now, I love this because you can learn so much about the southern resident social structure. They have also lots of stories of Native American beliefs and folklore surrounding these animals, which is a really nice touch and really nice homage to the people that really grew up with these orcas. And these are people who also see these whales as more than just animals. The Whale Museum also has a section where you can watch recent footage of orcas caught on camera at Limekiln Lighthouse. The Whale Museum has a YouTube channel where they have both a webcam with a telescopic lens and a hydrophone at one of the best land-based whale watching spots on the planet. This overlooks critical southern resident habitat, and this also includes a recommended vessel no-go area as well to protect that critical habitat. Downstairs they also have a live sightings board. One other thing I like is that when you visit, you get a card of an individual orca with some questions on the back of your ticket, basically. And this serves as a goal to be able to answer these questions based on what you can find around the museum. You can find the answers to these questions in the museum itself. So it's a nice guided way of like having a bit of an exercise to learn more at the museum. But that's only half of it, because this is not just a physical museum. You see, the Whale Museum is a whole lot more than just a building. The Whale Museum, firstly, has adoptions for southern resident killer whales. These are labeled as symbolic, which means you'll get a certificate of your whale, and you'll learn about what's going on with the southern residents periodically. The information you receive is the same regardless of which whale you pick, but by picking a whale, you gain a connection with that whale. I feel that interest in individual whales generates interest in the rest of them. If you're invested in, let's say the orca that I've adopted, L90, I'm very invested into what's happening with L90. And as such, that's actually generating my interest probably more towards L-pod than any of the other pods of the southern residents. It also makes me yearn for more information about her, more news about her, potentially like sightings, like seeing her. It gets me invested, and something very important with the southern residents, it keeps them fresh in my mind, which is so important. They are not around in the Salish Sea that much nowadays, but they must not be forgotten. Their stories have to be kept alive if we are to keep going at the conservation efforts to help save them. Another extremely important project is the Marine Mammal Response Program. I sat down with Erin from the Whale Museum to talk about this program. Do you want to introduce yourself first of all?
Sure. My name is Erin Casillas. I'm the Response Program Coordinator here at the Whale Museum for the Marine Mammal Stranding Network.
All right. And do you want to tell us a little bit about the Marine Mammal Response Program?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are the Marine Mammal Stranding Network for San Juan County, Washington. So we field all the reports of any type of stranded marine mammal within San Juan County. So they can be live and in distress in some way or dead already. So we do want reports for both of those things. And since San Juan County is a big island region, much of our response work is done by boat to get out to wherever the report is coming from.
So do you deal mostly with stranded, or do you do anything with like entanglements, for instance?
Yeah. So actually, somewhat recently in the last year, we've been more involved with entangled whale responses with a few entangled humpbacks in the region, and we've always been involved with entangled pinniped responses in the region as well. And for the entanglement responses, we work really closely with folks from Sea Dock Society and the Vancouver Aquarium and the veterinarians from that team. And then as far as stranding goes, stranding is pretty much like a marine mammal that is unable to return to the shore without help or in need of some sort of medical assistance, or also for cetaceans still free swimming but in need of some sort of assistance.
So what should people do if they encounter an entanglement, first of all?
They should report it immediately and stay with the animal without disturbing it. And so that goes for a pinniped, so maybe a seal with a fishing hook sort of in its lip on shore. The last thing they should do is scare it into the water, because once it's in the water, it's really hard for us to get to it. And then with something like a whale, it's really hard to lose a whale. And so if folks see that entanglement, they should call while they're keeping their eyes on it. It's finding a line between not further harassing or disturbing that animal in distress, but making sure that you can stick with it and not lose it so that the responders can get there in time and find it again.
So with seals, other than the obvious, like being entangled, is there any other way that people of the public can tell if a seal is in need of help?
For sure. That is really tough. And that's actually a majority of the reports we get. Over 80% of all of our calls are about harbor seal pups during the summer months, during pupping season. And it is tough because harbor seals use the shore for part of their life. The moms will leave them on the shore and then go and forage. And so the pup is alone and meant to be alone for sometimes hours, sometimes like a whole day. But people can, if they report the animal in distress, maybe the pup on the beach, then we would monitor it. And then if it has been undisturbed for a while, then it might stay in the environment and we'll see how nature takes its course. But if humans have disturbed it in some way, like maybe a dog bit it or somebody picked it up and moved the pup, then that's when we would step in and give the pup another chance.
So would you recommend the public to err on the side of caution and always report in?
100%.
Okay.
Yes, always report something. We want everybody to report whatever they're concerned about, and then we can determine, we have volunteers and we have some crew, and then we can monitor that animal and see if it is actually in need of assistance and maybe in its situation because of humans, or it is just a natural situation that's occurring. Yeah.
So when I worked, when I trained with an organisation in the UK as a marine mammal medic, like we had several different recommendations, and I get the impression it's kind of different all around the world, like just slightly different. Mm-hmm. So obviously the most obvious thing that, like the most obvious thing to people that you do is when you encounter a stranded animal. Mm-hmm. So what would you recommend people do if they find both a living and a dead stranded animal?
To not touch it. I think that is the first instinct for a lot of people, is to maybe help it back in the water or help it further out of the water, and touching it is the last thing that any of the reporters should do. They should report it immediately, because especially if it's alive, time really matters in that case. Another big deal up here especially is if there are dogs on the beach, to make sure that the dogs are on leashes, and that's for the safety of the animal but also for the safety of the dog, so that the dog doesn't get sick from whatever reason the animal is stranded. But really it's being hands off and calling the appropriate responders as fast as you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll put on screen in the actual video more information on like who to call for
Cool.
that.
Thanks.
Yeah, I know it's not just like the threat to people from touching these cetaceans, but we also have bacteria that is toxic to them as well.
Yeah, we can get each other sick.
Yeah. So what about dead cetaceans?
Yeah, dead cetaceans are, again, something that should be reported as soon as you see it. If it has already passed away, then time is a little bit less of the essence, but we have pretty big tide cycles here, and so sometimes that can carry strandings away if it was on the beach and the tide comes in. Again, definitely not touching it because it's pretty gross and we don't know why it was there. It could be very sick. But reporting it when we are able to collect those carcasses and do a necropsy, we can learn a lot from that animal, and they're often indicators. Well, they are indicators. For example, exactly. It's incredible education, and we can learn about what's going on in the ecosystem by this rare opportunity to actually see inside and study, study the creatures that end up on the beach.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to interview.
For sure. Thank you so much. This is great.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Now, an example of an action that the Marine Mammal Response Program has conducted, actually pretty recently, concerned one of my favorite match lions, the T65Bs. T65B2 life stranded on the 16th of July. This is a 7-year-old male orca, and this whale was simply just caught out by the tide during a storm and got stuck on a sandbar. So, in collaboration with CDOC and under the authority of NOAA, they evaluated the young whale medically, finding that the whale was not sick. He was just merely caught out by the conditions and the geography at the moment. Now, they were able to assess that with the incoming tide, this whale could self-rescue, which is an important learning experience for the orca. So they opted to observe but not intervene unless they actually needed to. The Whale Museum also operates Soundwatch, who work to educate boaters on how to act around whales. I sat down with Alex to talk about Soundwatch. Hi, do you want to introduce yourself again?
I'm Alex Borowitz. I lead the Soundwatch team at the Whale Museum.
So we have already spoken before, but in the video that's actually going to be after, so it's going to be a little bit interesting. Do you want to tell me a little bit about Soundwatch?
Absolutely. So Soundwatch is a program of the Whale Museum that's focused on trying to help boaters out on the water be better stewards of the Salish Sea and be responsible around whales. So we have sort of three things that we do. We do research, so we're trying to understand what boats are doing on the water when they're around whales, what kinds of boats, what kind of activities, what kind of people are out there, so that we can make better guidelines, make better rules. We do education to help boaters understand what the current rules and guidelines are and how they can be better boaters. And we do sort of monitoring and intervention. When we're out in the water with whales and boats, we're talking to people, we're trying to keep people from getting too close and speeding around whales whenever we can.
So, do you want to tell my viewers why this is important? Specifically, first of all, let's start with why it's important around the southern residents.
Yeah, absolutely. The program really starts with the southern residents. So this is a population that's had so many threats and challenges over the last 50, 100 years, from the era of capture, which took a lot of animals out of the population, and later toxins, which are still lingering in the bodies of a lot of these animals, and now having fewer salmon around, climate change, as well as past fishing practices are part of the reasons there. And these days, this is just a busy area. The Salish Sea is a place people love to be. They love to be on the water here. It's gorgeous, so there are there are boats all over the place, recreational boaters, there are ferries, there are commercial fishing vessels, there's cargo traffic. All of that is happening in this incredible area, which is really important for the southern residents. So being on the water for us and trying to get boaters to be responsible around whales is one thing we can do to sort of minimize that disturbance. We're not solving the fishing problem, we're not solving the toxin problem, we certainly aren't solving the past capture problem, but we can at least make the Salish Sea a little bit less stressful for these whales.
Yeah, and so it's important to keep, I know it's important to keep the sound levels low as well for their echolocation when they're searching for food as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Boats make all sorts of different noises. You have cargo vessels with gigantic engines in them that make a huge amount of noise. And we have some programs going on right now with the Port of Vancouver, for example, the ECHO program, that slows ships down when there are southern residents around. So they reduce their speed, and that has a measurable decrease in the amount of noise that gets put out into these straits when the whales are around. It's an incredible benefit. But then we have, all of these other boaters around with outboard engines, with inboard engines. They make all sorts of different sounds, and it varies a lot depending on how fast you're going, on whether you're speeding up or slowing down, whether you're close or not. So all of those noises have some overlap with the frequencies that these whales are either communicating at or echolocating at. And so, you can sort of think of it as being, in a crowded room, in a crowded party, and trying to have a conversation with someone versus, being on a quiet walk in the park with someone. It's much easier, it's much less stressful when you're in that quieter environment.
So to our viewers, in the video we've talked about the webcam and the hydrophone at Lime Kiln. And if you want a good example of how loud these large ships are, just listen to that when there's a large ship coming over. It's impossible to hear anything in the water.
Absolutely. These are massive ships. They weigh a lot, and just the amount of mass you have to move requires a lot of fuel. These ships burn literal tons of fuel, so you can sort of get an idea of how much more power and noise they're putting out than your car engine, for example.
So, do you also advise kayakers?
We do, yeah. You might think that a kayak has no impact on whales. They're small, they don't have engines, they're not making noise. But the other part of this is just sort of the visual environment or the physical environment that the whales have to navigate. Having a lot of boats around of any type, even quiet boats, sailboats, kayaks, is still something that these whales have to pay attention to. And especially when you have a lot of kayaks around, a big group, a tour group, for example, and they're all moving in different directions. As a whale, you're sort of trying to keep track of all of those and make sure none of them are a threat while you're still trying to, communicate and socialize and find food. So we have some recommendations for kayaks, and that's usually to keep pretty close to shore. But also if they do end up in a situation where they're around whales, the whales come to them, they come upon whales suddenly, to have all those kayaks just raft up together, be one big thing in the water rather than a bunch of different small things all doing different things.
So whilst I've been out here in Friday Harbour, I've been on several boat trips, and honestly, I can't remember one boat trip where there hasn't been someone speeding through where a group of orcas are. Sometimes they've slowed down and stopped after they've seen the whale warning flag. Sometimes they haven't. So what is potentially the biggest problem? People not being aware that whales are there, or people just not caring?
I think these days it's less about not caring. We're in an incredible place here, and people come here to see whales. They come here because it's beautiful. We believe in the Salish Sea as an amazing place. So people generally, aren't there because they don't care about whales. They really just are sort of oblivious, and that's one of the things we try to communicate with people. You don't have to be oblivious. You can keep a sharp lookout when you're on the water, and start picking up on some of those clues you might have around, like whether there are whale watch boats around, whether there's a bunch of boats that are moving slowly in the same direction, and that whale warning flag, which I think is an incredible innovation here.
It's incredible,
a flag that is specifically to tell people that there are whales around and that they should slow down. So a big part of what we do is that education. The more people we can tell about the whale warning flag, the more whale warning flags we can give out, the closer we get to having sort of everybody on the same page here. There certainly are people here who don't care about whales and don't mind if they drive right through a pod of killer whales, but for the most part, they're folks who just don't know what's going on and don't really have a good idea of how to operate a boat, responsibly when there are whales around. And it's not hard, right? Slow down a little bit, make sure you know what's going on before you zoom through an area, and keep your distance if you see whales.
I can imagine, because I was out here during the 4th of July weekend as well. I can imagine there's a lot of tourists that don't know about this.
Absolutely. We work hard to sort of fill in the gaps there. Obviously, if you're sailing up from California or Oregon and you've never, run into the whale rules before, there's only so much we can do. But we have a lot of folks who come in and they'll charter a boat. And so we try to work with the charter companies and the marinas around here to make sure they have signs up, they have brochures that they're going to give out to their guests, so that at least we can give them a little bit of information before they hop onto the water.
Yeah. So my channel focuses quite a lot on international whale and dolphin news, and there's some place in the world which are whale hotspots that kind of should be envious of what you have in the Pacific Northwest in terms of like conservation and making sure you're responsible around whales. For anyone that's trying to get into conservation in those places, what would you recommend or suggest to get something like Soundwatch going there?
I think it starts with a belief that these animals matter, and that's not hard to find in a lot of places. Especially killer whales. They're evocative. They're incredible animals, and it doesn't take a lot for folks to get on board with wanting to make sure they're safe. But that goes for a lot of other whales too. There's certainly challenges in places with a lot of industrial activity where there are particularly endangered marine mammals. But for us, we started out as a pretty small project, just the cost of getting some folks out on a boat now and again to just see what was going on. And once we started to collect some data, we started to talk to people, we were able to put together a little information that we could start passing on to regulators, to the local government, the state government, the federal government, and with the idea that once they have that information, they sort of have to act on it. If we know there's a problem, there's some responsibility that follows out of that. And since that time, we've been out here over 30 years now. And the program has grown out of that, and we do really important work now. The data that we collect on the water is directly fed into the regulatory process out here. And the education that we do is, the state and federal government both recognize that it takes a lot of pressure off of them when, if they make a rule, they know that we're going to be out there making sure that people know about it.
So I'm aware that, I think it was last month, Canada passed new guidelines.
They did. It's a little complicated in Canada, and it's heartening. It's still like we're not quite over the finish line there yet. There are two parts. Transport Canada, which regulates shipping in Canada, has a temporary order that has increased the distance that boats need to stay from southern resident killer whales to 1,000 meters. And it's sort of a stopgap right now while a permanent regulation is moving its way through the comment and regulatory process. So I'm not sure when that regulation is going to be finalized. They're reviewing the comments as we speak. So hopefully that moves its way through and is out, maybe in the winter or early next year. I don't really know what the pace of that process is. But once that's in place, we've got 1,000 meters from southern residents in Canada and 1,000 yards in the state of Washington, which is all of the water around here. So they're not quite the same, obviously, meters to yards, but close enough that I think we've got real agreement in the region that boats really need to stay away from these animals if we want them to recover.
Yeah. Well, one thing I like is that whale watching boats no longer go and see southern residents as well.
It's an incredible difference. I took over this program in January, but I was out here 10 years ago working for Soundwatch, and that was the time where the southern residents were in the area all the time, and the whale watching boats went to watch them every single day. You'd have dozens and dozens of boats clustered around these endangered animals. And now, absolutely, they're out with bigs, transient killer whales most days, with humpbacks, and even when the southern residents are here, they're really not allowed to watch them. It's sort of, we've all agreed that we have to give these animals space if we want them to be able to recover.
I think that's a very good thing. Well, thank you for your time.
No, my pleasure.
The Whale Museum is also one of the core partners of Be Whale Wise, which is a partnership of many conservationally minded organizations, including NOAA, DFO, and the US Coast Guard. Oh, by the way, just in case you don't know, DFO is Canadian, so there is representation on both sides of the border. Now, their job, Be Whale Wise that is education and enforcement of guidelines and laws regarding good boating practices around whales and dolphins. You just heard about one of their partners, Soundwatch. Now, while orcas particularly are able to avoid boat strikes quite a lot, there have been boat strikes in the past on orcas, and it's rude towards big orcas, and it can be detrimental towards southern residents when they're feeding. Boat strikes, however, are much more dangerous towards baleen whales who cannot move out the way of a boat quickly. And especially with the recent decline in grey whales, this is even more important than ever before. So I ran into Be Whale Wise on the dock whilst waiting for a whale watching trip. So I want to give a massive shout out to Alex again for agreeing to talk to me on camera. This time unplanned, and this was actually recorded before the previous interview. Okay, so do you want to explain what Be Whale Wise is?
Sure, yeah. Be Whale Wise is a project that started between the Whale Museum and a group called CETACEan in Canada, but now it's a multi-agency, multi-nonprofit, multi-country program trying to help boaters stay safe around whales and keep whales safe from boats. So it's mostly about messaging and sharing current regulations and guidelines for how to keep whales safe out in the Salish Sea.
So these guidelines, I mean, in the actual video I'll be explaining the guidelines, and you can see it there. They're not laws, are they? They're just guidelines.
They're both guidelines and laws. So we have different laws from the US and Canadian federal governments, as well as the state of Washington, that are specific distances that boaters are required to stay away from whales. There are also a variety of guidelines that we've put together over the years to minimize disturbance to especially killer whales out here. So there are some voluntary no-go zones, for example, on the west side of San Juan Island, and some guidelines we have for kayakers, for example. These are things that we ask boaters to do because we know they're good for whales.
So are any of the cetaceans other than the southern residents in laws, for instance? Are there any laws against those?
All marine mammals in the United States are protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So boaters are required to not harass them. Harassment can take a lot of different forms, so that could be driving very fast or driving towards whales, driving through a group of whales, or things like actively harming a whale by hitting it with a boat or something like that. So those are absolutely laws for all whales, all dolphins, all marine mammals in general. The Canadian government has a variety of rules as well. So they have rules for all marine mammals, but they're more focused on specific rules for specific threatened species.
Okay, so some of your guidelines are distances, and on a boat it can sometimes be difficult to judge a distance. How would you recommend people judge distances?
Judging distance is one of the hardest things out in the water in general, and it's become even harder with the most recent rules that have come out. So Washington State has now increased the distance boaters have to stay from southern resident killer whales. So these are our most endangered killer whales out here, to 1,000 yards. And it's difficult to judge 1,000 yards in any sort of situation. Yeah. Our partners have developed a rangefinder card. So it's just the size of a business card, and we've got killer whales of different sizes on here. And the idea is just that you hold it out at arm's length, and the size of a killer whale on here is the size that you want it to be. So if it's larger than the little killer whale, then
that's really
too
cool.
Close.
That's very useful then.
Absolutely. I love these things. We try to hand them out to everyone we can on the water here.
So, how do you let people know that there are whales in the water?
The most recent tool we have is the whale warning flag. So this has been developed over a number of years, and the color and shape here is sort of also helping boaters remember that in the path and behind whales is not a place they want to be, and they want to keep their distance when they're off to the side. But this is the whale warning flag, and we give these out to boaters in Washington State. And the idea is, if you're around whales, they put the flag up, gives everyone around them just a heads up that there are whales around, and that they should slow down to 7 knots or less and start to keep their distance and a sharp lookout. We're seeing more and more boaters put these up when we're out on the water, and it's a great tool, I think.
So even private boaters can be putting those out?
Absolutely, yeah. That's why we're here today, mostly. To help people understand the rules, the regulations out on the water, but also to give them a whale warning flag. We would love every boater to have one of these.
And are there any specific guidelines for instance, if a group of big orcas have a calf, for instance, as opposed to a group of big orcas that doesn't have a calf?
Yeah, so all marine mammals with calves, or all whales with calves, folks are required to keep an extra distance from those. Most of those distances are required under federal law, which is a little bit looser than the laws in Washington State. So in general, the easiest way to follow all of these rules is to go slow, keep a good lookout, and whenever you see whales around, to just keep your distance.
All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Yeah, you betcha.
So the Whale Museum are doing a fantastic job in their efforts to protect the vulnerable wildlife in the Salish Sea. But it is a tough battle. While I was out over in the Salish Sea on boat tours, on the vast majority of my trips, I witnessed boats speeding near or over whales. Now, granted, I was out there on the 4th of July weekend, and that was the worst period of it. And from what I hear, talking to local captains, naturalists, and professionals, a lot of the culprits are tourists, private boaters, and visitors that are either uninformed, people that are not paying attention. They could be informed, they could care, but they're not paying much attention. That is also a possibility. They need to be a little bit more vigilant, but usually the ones that are vigilant, there'll be a boat that blows the horn, or like they're waving the whale warning flag, and I saw this so much. I saw the naturalists on these boats waving the whale warning flag so often, and quite a lot of the times the boats do end up slowing down. So it is more inattentive. And I also want to give a shout here to the whale watching industry in the Salish Sea. Some people like to point fingers of blame at them, but I think it's better that there's some people out there to alert other boaters that there are whales there than no one. And also, it's better whale watching boats than big cargo ships. The whale watching boats, it's their profession. They can't break these guidelines because, first of all, that's really, really bad publicity for them. But I also genuinely think, and I see this given how often they wave the flag, that the naturalists and the captains on these whale watching boats genuinely care about these animals. They really do. I have seen this firsthand. You can't fake passion like that. But another thing with the Whale Museum is that there are also a lot of people who wouldn't know the right thing to do if they found a stranded whale or a seal in trouble, for instance. This is why the projects that the Whale Museum conducts and the education of the museum itself and their talks are vital to the local ecology. I didn't talk about their talks. They do talks sometimes on YouTube as well. That can educate people as far away as France. I mean, I've listened to some of their talks before. So if you want to support the Whale Museum, one way you can do it is by adopting a southern resident orca, or you can even just become a member with them. You could even make a donation directly. And if you are in the Salish Sea, give them a visit. Support their efforts by being informed and transferring that message that they're trying to tell. I want to give a massive thank you to the Whale Museum for allowing me to make this video and allowing me to interview two of their colleagues. And I also want to give a massive shout to Dante as well for kind of putting this idea in my head to make a video about the Whale Museum. So yeah, if you liked the video, feel free to leave a like, subscribe for more whale and dolphin content, and leave us a comment. Tell us what you think about the Whale Museum.